National Signing Day Part 2. If, you're an Aggie, I guess. There's not been a whole lot going on, and yet here we are. It's National Signing Day. I'm Jeff Ketchum. That is not on Warren Richardson. I'm so, boy, if his ears are burning, that's Chad Hastings. That is also Jason Sukumo. It's the Orange Bloods Recruiting Hour here on Orange Bloods Live. Welcome. If you're in the Specs chat, hello. We'll take your questions as they come in. Super chats go right to the top. Do us a solid. Hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel. Get notifications. I've been looking at our subscriber total number. It feels like it's been frozen for a couple of days. Come on, people. Hit that subscribe button. It is National Signing Day. Steve Sarkisian held an 11 o'clock press conference today. There's a lot inside of that press conference. There wasn't a lot of newsy things to report on today, so it's mostly about Sark, the promotions that were made yesterday. He goes in deep a little bit on the Brandon Harris discussion and kind of what motivated him to make that move. I thought some of that was interesting. Jason, I'll start with you. The headline for you he spoke for 45 minutes, so he went on about a lot of different topics, asked about a lot of different things. The thing for you that stood out, if any?
I knew that would be your first question, so I literally took some notes and wrote them down, okay? Can I go through them? Yep. I know you too well, Cash. I knew it. So I got like 5 things. Like you said, it wasn't a press conference just full of like actual news, hard-hitting news, but I thought it was interesting when he was talking about the wide receivers, and he said, hey, man, and I guess I didn't really realize, it didn't dawn on me, that they had 3 returning scholarship wide receivers. They lost everybody else. That's crazy to me, either leaving early, graduating, or leaving via the portal from last year. So he said, hey, it would have been malpractice had we not gone out and got portal receivers. So they went out and got the 3 receivers, which then I thought led to the very last question of the press conference. And I thought it was a pretty good question. I don't know the girl's name. I'm sorry, but she asked him, what does that mean? Bringing in 3 experienced portal guys for the 3 freshmen from last year, because I've wondered that myself. What's Jonte Cook and Ryan Niblett thinking about all these receivers coming in? And Sark, as you expect, Sark just kind of said, hey, those guys are all talented players. We didn't bring them in if they weren't talented players. But it does bring up some curious dynamics to me. We'll see how it unfolds in the spring. How are they going to divide those reps? If a guy like Jonte Cook is not getting enough reps, is Jonte going to get a little bit frustrated? I don't know. He talked about Kenny Baker, of course, mentioned the high expectations for him as a recruiter, which I thought was interesting because I don't know anything about this guy as a recruiter. One of my goals tonight and tomorrow is to maybe hit up a couple defensive linemen and say, hey, have you talked to Kenny Baker? Tell me about him. What's your first impression of him? Because I don't know much about him as a recruiter. Sark did say that he has high expectations of him. He mentioned that they want to make a couple more additions to their recruiting personnel department. And I tell you, the thing that I thought stood out to me, maybe the comment that he made, and again, not real newsworthy, he was talking about just his process and where things go from here and what the next 3 years may look like. And he said, hey, when I came to Texas, I came to win a championship. And when I win that one, I want my second one. He's already thinking about his second one. He said, I'm borderline obsessed with it. So I thought that was pretty interesting just to hear him say, I am borderline obsessed. He said, we came so close last year. We almost got a taste of it, but I want to get that first one. I'm obsessed with it. And then he's already thinking once he gets the first, he wants to get a second one. So I thought there were some pretty interesting notes and developments. Again, we mentioned he talked a lot about the transfer portal guys. He mentioned just about every assistant coach on his staff got a job offer somewhere else. They lost Bo Davis, of course, but he said just about everybody else on the staff had other job offers. So not the most newsy press conference, but still an interesting press conference.
You know what? How dare both of you for missing the big story of that press conference?
Uh-oh.
Quinn Ewers is the starting quarterback, and Arch Manning is the backup. How have we buried that lead? Yes, someone did ask that question.
I couldn't believe someone actually asked that. It's funny. Yesterday on the Modcast, we were kind of talking about what would be our first question for Sark, and I sarcastically said,
"Yeah,
who's the starting quarterback. Someone asked that today. So
it did get asked. If you need to know, Quinn is the starter. Catch, I also enjoy, I'm a fan of heavy metal music. I like that Sark talked about the devil today. Complacency is the devil. I kind of like that. That sounds like something Nick Saban would have talked about. That doesn't sound like a Pete Carroll office comment. That sounds like a Nick Saban office kind of comment, that complacency is the devil. They don't want to feel like they've arrived and all that kind of stuff. I enjoyed the theme, at least the thematic side of that part.
That might live on for a little bit. Alex may have even said it on Football with Friends that he wants it because he wrote about it on Orange Bloods, that he wants that put on a T-shirt.
Yeah,
it's funny, because it was on the Longhorn Network. I had to go in to my bedroom to watch the Longhorn Network because that's the TV in the house that has direct TV running through it so that I can have the Longhorn Network. I'm laying on the bed. I'm just listening to the press conference and not watching it. And he said that, and I'd literally turned into one of the old dudes on the Muppets because I said out loud to nobody who's in there with me, I just heard complacency is the devil. And I thought, well, why did you just make 4 hires from 4 people who were all inside the building already? The snarky side of me was thinking, isn't the greatest sign of complacency when you're like, I'm not hiring any outside people. I'm not hiring any super talented people. I'm hiring the people who already have a paycheck and have offices, and we don't have to change anything. I know he didn't mean it that way, but it was interesting to hear him philosophically talk about culture. We don't want to get complacent. We can't get complacent. I don't want them thinking about last season because we didn't do anything. And yet, in hiring a general manager, which, man, I don't think we've talked about this enough. I think this is a big deal, and it's a major piece of responsibility that is now on Brandon Harris's shoulders. Good for him. It's kind of the opportunity of his lifetime so far. This is a guy, if I'm not mistaken, played his college football in LSU. I think his career ended in 2014, right? Because when Charlie came in, there was some scuttlebutt that Brandon Harris might transfer and be a quarterback that comes in and plays. And I'm pretty sure his last season was 2014, a decade later. So we're talking about a guy that is 32-ish. He's the general manager for one of the, true significant historical powerhouses in college football, right? We're talking about the Longhorns are 6th or 7th all time in wins. So you're in the same breath with Michigan and Notre Dame and the powers of the sport. It's a huge promotion. And it's fascinating to look at what other schools have done in hiring general managers, to see what Texas has done hiring a general manager. And I'm a little curious about it because, Jason, I feel like you and I have been a part of modcasts where even back when it was like the Ticket City podcast, right? Back before it just became the modcast. I feel like going all the way back then, I've been an advocate for, I think Texas needs a general manager. And I've said, but I think it needs to be somebody who's got experience with agents and they have an NFL background and they can both work on player retention and squad development, but also scouting. And it's a lot of different roles. And I thought you want to get somebody who's done that, right? If you're Texas, go spend $1 million and get, Bill Polian or something like that to be your general manager. And you've got super quality. And they've hired a guy who was the director of recruiting, who is now being run. And again, we talked about this on House Divided. It's really fascinating that a woman now is in the director of recruiting position because that may make her one of the highest ranking women in all of college football. But now the guy that was in that position is now the general manager of your program. And I think because it happened on the eve of National Signing Day and Sark did a press conference and talked about so many things, Jason, I don't know how to rank it. Someone was like, on a scale of 1 to 10, is it a coordinator? Is it just below the coordinator? Is it higher than an analyst? And it's like, well, general manager sounds really big. Like maybe it's not a coordinator, but it's close. It's a really important hire.
I'm going to push back and disagree a little bit. I don't think it's anywhere close to a coordinator. Again, we talked about it on the modcast.
Should it not be, though?
Well, we're not talking about an NFL GM who goes in and basically runs the draft for most teams, or even a baseball GM who wheels and deals and does the trades. I'm looking at my notes, and these are not quotes, obviously, but on Brandon Harris, and Sark said, hey, like his relationship with players is impressive. His character is impressive. His perception of character is impressive. Communication's impressive. He said he and Brandon Harris kind of feel and communicate and think similarly. Hey, if I'm not able to go to a meeting, I feel comfortable that Brandon Harris can do it. But he said the general manager is a little bit of everything in college football: transfer portal, NIL, relationships with players, managing the roster at a high level, obviously with a lot of help. I mean, the head coach to me is almost the general manager in terms of roster management. He said he wanted someone in that role that was connected. He was connected to at a high level, and he thinks Brandon Harris is that guy. He said Brandon Harris is going to have a high level role at Texas or anywhere else for a long time. And Brandon is a young guy and up and coming guy, obviously. It's an important position. He's going to oversee just about everything, but I don't think in a general manager sense, he's going to be the guy that says, okay, we need to go out and get 2 linebackers and 3 wide receivers. Let's target this guy. Hey, coaches, you go bang, bang, bang. Let's start hitting up these guys. He's not the guy that just kind of builds the roster the way I think a professional general manager does, but it is a key role. I mean, listen, Sark's the main guy. Coordinators, assistant coaches. He's probably right there, in my opinion, maybe with some of the assistant coaches, maybe a tad bit below them, because those guys are doing on the field things. But it's certainly one of the more powerful positions in the program for sure.
We wildly disagree, because first of all, he is now essentially the supervisor. Like you said, he's in charge of a lot of areas. He's in charge. What's interesting is previous to 18 hours ago, the highest ranking position in the program was director of player personnel, and he was director of recruiting. Now, I do think one of the things that's happened is that because of NIL, because of the transfer portal, I think there's been some bleeding over, right? So I think he's probably doing some player personnel stuff and doing some other things. But, when I look at what, in theory, so the one thing that you're right about that's completely different, right? The elephant in the room is that unlike professional sports, Sark is really the general manager and the coach. He
really is. And Sark said it today. Sark said, I'm built for this, taking on all this. To me, listen, we can wildly disagree, but Sark does so much of it is on his own that I think it.
But one of the things that I've always said is, in order for Sark to be the best that he can be, he can't scout the portal. Right. It can't be his job to have in the middle of the season, to have his nose deep into what are agents saying behind the scenes about players who are going to go into the portal. Who are you expecting? Like there's just on the portal side, there is a massive amount of back work that it's impossible to think that Sarkisian could really be doing, along with all of his other responsibilities in the middle of a season. So
is it really the GM that's going to be having those communications, though, Ketch? You and I both know there are other people that do a lot of those communications in terms of NIL deals.
But I think it should be, because I think if you hire, the thing is, in 2024, even more so, everybody's got an agent, everybody's got a lawyer. It's moving less and less. Look, when Xavier Worthy first came to Texas and I signed him to an NIL deal, I did that through his mom. By the end of his season, and as a freshman, he's got serious representation. And I think very quickly in the world of NIL, whether it be, you think about a guy like Isaiah Bond had to have some sort of official representation that suddenly his entire recruitment kind of goes through, because if you're going to have representation, better use your representation. And there's a lot to the job now that I think instinctively Sark does want to do it all. He wants to cook the meal. He wants to take it out. And look, you know what? I'm like that somewhat on Orange Bloods, right? I mean, I'm over here writing men's basketball stories and women's basketball stories. And I'm in the middle of watching a basketball game last night, and I whip up 5 thoughts on Brandon Harris's elevation. I did that before the freaking basketball game was even over. Like, I'm like Sark. I get it. But I also know that, you know what, I'm probably at my best when I really do delegate, when I really do trust the people who are working for me, whenever I'm not micromanaging very closely. So I identify with Sark in that respect, but I just think that the sport has moved in a direction where, Jason, the thing about college football coaches is they're used to total control. I mean, we're not that far removed from an era where guys get arrested, right? In Waco or State College or something like that. And our actual expectation is that the police will check in with the head coach and, you know, that the head coach is so omnipresent and so powerful that the police call him, that the school presidents call him, and not vice versa. You know, it's just and I think one of the things that college coaches have somewhat struggled with is used to having a certain amount of power, and now they don't. It's one of the reasons why they kind of bellyache about the portal, because suddenly the players have more power than they did 3 or 4 years ago. I just think that Sark's at his best as a recruiter, as a coach, devising game plans, and he's an A+ recruiter. But if you're asking that guy to scout all of the players in the portal and in recruiting across multiple classes, you have to have really, really talented people. And I think the choice of the GM is really interesting. He went with the guy that's the biggest extension of himself. He double bumped past director of player personnel into a newly created role. And in describing it, he said, look, I don't know if it's because we're former quarterbacks or whatever, but Brandon Harris is an extension of me. And when I'm not available for a meeting, it sounds, again, kind of sounds like me, right? He's got to be in everything. But when he's not, he's going to have somebody, a direct extension of him. The other way to go would have been, who's the best person we can get? Forget about whether I know him or not. Is there someone that we could bring in from a general manager standpoint that we could unequivocally say, that's the best GM in college football? I don't know that Sark would say that about Brandon Harris. What I think he would say is he's the best general manager for me, and maybe he's the best, as a byproduct of that, Chad, he's the best general manager for Texas. But I feel like I think our expectations when a job comes open, I think we saw this with Kenny Baker. The expectation is that they sign somebody elite of the elite, that when it's over with, it's a bit of a flex, like the Johnny Nansen hire, where it's like they hired the Arizona defensive coordinator to be co-DC, not calling plays, and linebackers coach. Like, what a badass hire that is. It doesn't feel like maybe they made the equivalent. And I think there are a lot of people that are like, trust Sark. He knows what he's doing. Had Texas in the playoff last year. Shut up and just trust that he knows everything. And I think there's another side of this where there are people who are wondering, is hiring the guy that you're most comfortable with, is that the most optimal hire that you can make for the good of the program? And I don't have a real good answer for that. Like, I wish I could tell, you two and everybody watching that I know the answer. But some of this is so new that you've even got Jason and I disagreeing about just how important the job is.
That doesn't happen often anymore, does it? Like, we can pretty much read each other's minds at this point.
You knew what question I was going to ask you. You just couldn't give me the answer I was looking for. What do you think, Chad? I kind of asked you this, and Jason, I'm curious your thoughts too. It's like both of you. I'm just curious. How do you view the Brandon Harris hire? Again, Sark called him a rock star, right? Yeah. So that's heavy usage. What did you think? What do you think of the hire of Brandon Harris? Is it enough, or if it's enough for Sark, it's enough?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a Texas fan, that's the first thing you want to believe, that Sark is wanting to hire the right guy for him, right? Is that person you married the one that all your friends think is perfect for you, or is the one you think is perfect for you? That's two different discussions. But the thing that's got me fascinated in listening to you guys talk about it and everybody talk about it, I keep reminding myself that 4 days ago, the job didn't exist. It did not exist. In fact, when we first talked about this, Catch, and Jason, this shows you my perspective on it. I didn't know that college football teams had GMs. I did not know they were referred to as GMs. And when it was announced that Lane Kiffin was taking on Billy Glasscock as a GM, I thought he meant director of player personnel. So when I just thought he gave it a new title, and then Catch, corrected me and said, no, these are different positions. So when we have somebody like Chris jump in the chat and say college football GM is wildly different from NFL GM, Chris, I think you're right.
He is right.
But I'm also about to ask a series of questions for which the answer to all of them is I don't know. Does A&M have a GM? Does Ohio State have a GM? Does Alabama have a GM? Does Georgia have a GM? Does Florida have a GM? Does Missouri have a GM? I know Ole Miss does. I don't know. I think it's I don't know to all the rest of it. So that's the part of it I'm trying to process. We got people coming in here about, is it you deal with high school recruiting? Are you in charge of recruiting, including high school in the portal? We all know Sark is still the true GM. Well, what the hell does that mean? I don't know. What does it mean? It's a job that didn't exist 4 days ago. How do we know? How do we say, well, Sark's going to bring him in to do X, Y, and Z when they literally didn't have the position before?
The portal has changed all of this. If the portal didn't exist and free agency didn't exist, you'd still be looking at the sport through the prism of your recruiting coordinators in charge of the significant piece of talent acquisition. But now there's finances and agents and players who are on other teams. It really is its own version of free agency. So, Jason, it's a completely different sport. I mean, the reason why GMs didn't exist 5 years ago is there was no need for one. You could just, everything was so contained that now the sport has so many tentacles going in different directions. It's why somebody behind the scenes who can operate at a high level is deemed as critical in some places. Look, at the University of Miami, they hired Alonzo Highsmith. Now, look, former Hurricane, so it makes a lot of sense. But he was in, front office management in the NFL. He was a scout. I mean, Jesus, I can remember, Jason probably can too. We'd go to UT Pro Days, and Alonzo Highsmith. Hell, I've used Alonzo Highsmith as a source before. Like, I'd bump into him and ask him a question and be like, hey, I talked to an NFL guy and asked this question as this is what he said. So he goes back to Miami and he's used to scouting. He's used to talking to agents. He's used to kind of senior management. Like, he checked a bunch of boxes that seemed like, yeah, no, that's what you want to hire in a general manager. I think in 10 years from now, we may look at Brandon Harris and say he's the best general manager in college football, maybe, right? But on day one, he's a very young guy that's being positioned in a place of management that I think is very new for him. Whereas the other way to go about making a hire like that is to hire somebody who's extensively trained in management of these types, someone from the NFL world who brings that to the college background. I just think that Sark didn't want to hire somebody like that because he wants to be in charge. He doesn't want a general manager kind of undercutting his power. And I don't think he's necessarily wrong. I think college coaches kind of have to wrestle the bear of, do I go hire Bill Polian if I can? But does that mean I get less credit? Does that mean I have less power? What does that mean? For Sarkisian, having Brandon Harris means that he doesn't have to relinquish any power. He just has a guy who can do a job for him.
I think there's a lot of truth in all of that. I mean, I don't think Sark wants to relinquish full power. And, if you hire from outside, those are going to be a powerful person you're going to bring in. And, they may come in and upset the apple cart and start bossing people around and piss people off too. Listen, Brandon Harris is the general manager. I don't know if he and Sark could tell you, okay, here's exactly what your day-to-day role is going to be. It's going to evolve. They're going to learn on the fly, right? And Brandon Harris is young. He's obviously talented. I think if Brandon Harris is on the show with us right now, he'd probably tell you, yeah, I'm going to have to learn. I'm going to probably, stub my toe here and there. But, obviously he's got a ton of potential. Sark thinks he has a ton of upside. He's part of Sark's inner circle. He's not going to upset other people in the, if you hire from the outside and you say, okay, you come in and from day one, you're going to start bossing Brandon Harris around and J.M. Jones and Taylor Searles and all these people. Some people might push back on that and be like, screw this. I'm going to go somewhere else where maybe I can be the authority. But, I think there's a lot, but I also think, Catch, deep down, I do think Sark loves having control. Now he's relinquishing some of it, okay, by hiring a general manager, but maybe it's a little bit less because he's promoting from within. But I do think Sark likes having, as you said, his tentacles in every part of the program. And I think he thinks he does it very well. And frankly, from what we know of him in 3 years, he does do it very well.
They were just in the playoffs. So,
so it's hard to argue too much. But, I think it makes sense in a lot of ways. Yes, could he have gone out and hired the most powerful GM in the history of the sport, and would that person have come in and done a great job? Yeah, but there probably have been some negatives there too in terms of how it was perceived. And Sark may have felt like it undercut him a little bit. Other people in the program might not have liked it. Would have cost a boatload of money. But I do think this is going to be a learning curve for everybody. It's going to be there's something they're going to have to grow in together. Obviously, if I'm kind of like what you said at the beginning. If Sark thinks it's going to work, dude, he's earned my trust. He's earned the benefit of the doubt from me. So if he thinks this is the best way to go about it, then I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, and we'll see where it goes from here.
Chad, hold that thought. Whatever your thought is, I want to go to this super chat real quick, and then I have a very specific question for you.
Okay,
because I think you're a great guinea pig. Okay, even if you don't want to be a guinea pig, I'm going to make you one.
Fair enough.
Oscar says for $9.99. Was that what you were going to do, Chad?
Absolutely.
Well, you read out the super chat. Stop drinking.
Thank you, Oscar, for the $9.99. I agree that it'd be a great hire to someone from the NFL, but would an ex-GM or executive even consider this job when these college GMs are really just working under the coach, unlike in the NFL? That's an interesting perspective.
It'd have to be like an assistant to the assistant GM or something.
Or
right?
someone that does it. Look, Rex Ryan just interviewed for the DC job in Dallas. That's a guy who's a former head coach who's working in the media. I'm not saying as a GM. I'm just saying that he's no longer head coach material. And it may be that you're talking about, maybe he's a guy that's older. Look, they've had as an offensive analyst for the last for last year, Paul Christ, hugely overqualified to just come in and be, an analyst. And yet that's what he's done. A lot of times it may be catching a guy at the right time in his career. Maybe he's just not going to get another front office gig in the NFL. Or maybe, as Jason said, it's somebody who's the Kenny Baker of GM somewhere. He's the assistant general manager, but he's been with the 49ers for 7 years, right? Or it's somebody like that. But, Chad, there's the question I wanted to ask you. And I think it follows off of Oscar.
Okay.
Let's look at the Aggies for a second. And again, congratulations on Terry Bussey today. The Aggies were about the only person today who had something to celebrate on actual signing day. If I told you right now the Aggies don't have a general manager, and I don't know if they do or don't, I don't think you do either. But I said the Aggies can hire, the Aggies are going to make a general manager. And right now, as much as Aggies might love Elko, he doesn't have, right? He hasn't achieved anything yet that would make you say, anything goes with Mike Elko. He's proven that he just gets everything right. If I said Elko could eat, the hire could be one of two things. It could be someone that Mike Elko thinks is an absolute extension for Helm, so that in every meeting he's in, if he can't be there because he's out on the road, but a meeting is taking place, that person just echoes whatever Elko would have otherwise said. You can get an Elko guy, or if I said there's a 38-year-old assistant general manager with the 49ers that is like maybe one of the next hot things and hasn't gotten his chance to be a big boy general manager in the NFL yet, because there's only 32 of those jobs and they often get recycled amongst the same people. You have a chance and this guy's a former Aggie. I don't know. I'm thinking of like the 49er Kyle Shanahan thing, but I'm just trying to juice this thing up a little bit. Would you rather have someone that Elko has never worked with before, but is regarded as a rock star in this exact kind of position from a front office standpoint in the NFL, but who knows how he and Elko will get along? Or would you just rather have the yes man who is going to do the job? Elko signs off on it. If you get one of the two choices in college football as an Aggie, do you have a sway towards one direction or the other?
I mean, obviously, if you could have a good mixture of both, it'd be great. My gut is to lean towards the second thing. My gut is to lean towards, if you believe a GM job is necessary, my first belief would be go get a GM that can be the best GM, that could understand your program, what it needs, the portal, NIL, all those discussions. And if the comeback was, well, maybe he's not an Elko guy, I'd say, well, okay, it's a different way of thinking about it. That didn't make it bad.
Yeah.
We don't need somebody that thinks every single thing the way the head coach does. It was an interesting comment from Sark today. He thinks like I do. But yeah, he thinks like me in a lot of ways. Sometimes that could be good, but is the most important part of that job, I need someone in a meeting that thinks exactly like I do? Or is it just I need someone to take care of a lot of different details, like, hey, did you know that the edge guy from UTSA just went into the portal? So I would lean towards that second idea. But to me, Catch, in terms of your comment earlier about importance, I don't know. I mean, there's obviously, you could argue there's more things that are important right now for a college football program, but this whole thing has brought up just there's got to be an immediacy to it. And there's no way this is not about an immediate thing for Sark, because he just created this thing out of thin air.
Well, I was going to ask Jason, do you think we're even having this conversation today if Glasscock doesn't take the Ole Miss job last week? Like, do we think if
Glasscock doesn't, probably the general manager? I think they probably were
too.
Right.
Yeah.
And why? And that's a weird question for Sark for a presser today. But Coach, if Glasscock was going to Ole Miss for a GM job and you didn't have a GM job, why didn't you just make one up? Just create it and say, we will continue to have you here.
It's one of the million questions that didn't get asked today that I can't believe didn't get asked.
We are going to give you that bump. Was Billy Glasscock your rock star at a higher level than Harris, or would you have given Harris the GM job and tried to talk Glasscock into staying?
Would you have even had a GM job if Glasscock doesn't leave for a GM job?
Right. Yeah. So there's a lot. I don't know. Here's what it feels like, fellas. Remember the early days of analysts when some programs did it, some didn't. At one moment, I believe the number was like Saban had 28 of them and A&M and Texas combined had none. Like at once, I think that literally was accurate at one point. So it was just about who's on board with it, who felt like it was important, and then who gets going. So this is Sark. This is back to the complacency thing too, Catch. I get what you're saying about complacency in terms of the hiring from within, But couldn't Sark argue to us, no, fellas, this is me staying progressive because I know what I need now. I just went through this whole cycle. We were badass. We went to the playoff. We had to deal with NIL and portal. And I feel like we did pretty well. But we can do better. We can tighten those screws. And this is how I do it. I create this new job. I'm moving a guy up I trust. And we're filling in the roles underneath. I am staying progressive here because now I know that I need a GM.
Jeff Collins says he thinks I'm making a mountain out of a molehill. but and that may be true. Like I'll leave that open to the possibilities, right? But people thought that when I said Texas should hire a GM in the first place. When I was advocating for this is the future of college football, be on the front foot, I think it's incredibly important that they have this kind of person in the program. That's oftentimes the response that I would get, which is, Catch, you're just making – this isn't even an issue. People aren't even doing this. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. No, what I'm suggesting is go hire – who was his main offensive analyst last year? Paul Christ. Who was his special teams? Wasn't it Joe DeCamillis?
Yep.
He left.
He went to the NFL and hired a guy who'd been in the NFL as a special teams coach for like 1 billion years. I'm suggesting, okay, well, if you're going to have this job, go get the Paul Christ / Joe DeCamillis to be of GMs. Because if you hired from within, from an offensive scout and said, this is my main offensive scout this year, he was, a part-time analyst last year, but now we'd go out and do bigger than that. Think bigger than that. I might be making a mountain out of a molehill, but I think the only point that I'm making, honestly, Jeff, love your first name, by the way. Spell it differently. Just go make the optimal hire. What's the best you can do? What isn't the best? The thing that why did he go get Isaiah Bond? Was it because he thought he and Isaiah Bond would get along together in the huddle and in practice, and that they could go like play video games on Twitch because they got along so well? Or did he think Isaiah Bond's the best wide receiver in the portal?
Totally different scenario.
No, the philosophy is, are you about going to get the absolute best at for every corner of the program, or are you not? And my point is that should kind of be the goal. The goal should be to hire the absolute best that you. It's what I said about Kenny Baker.
Sark used the word culture 50 times in his press conference today. You're risking that culture if you go out and hire some hot shot from the NFL. I mean, culture is seriously, it is probably the most important thing to Sark right now in his program. So, like I said earlier, by promoting from within, you're continuing that culture. You're not rocking the boat. You're not pissing off the other people in the program who said, hey, I put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears here, and now you're going out and plucking someone to, instead of promoting me and giving me a chance.
They've literally offered a high school kid who Texas fans are losing their shit about because you wouldn't think from a culture standpoint.
And since then, like every program in the country.
No, I know. I think culture is one of these words that people use. But
culture's great when you're winning. Culture is easy to lean on when you're winning.
Every school in the country thinks their culture is great.
Well, not when you're 2-4.
The coach will tell you the culture is either developing or it's great, but like everybody kind of loves their culture. They went out and recruited the best available talent in the portal. And I don't think a lot of it had to do with, is it going to upset our culture or not? It was about, can this guy come out and start for us at wide receiver from day one? And they passed on guys in the portal that were really talented. Why? Because they thought someone even more talented would show up. So, everybody that they've recruited, you always think the best. You always think these guys can come in. I can coach them up. They'll learn the culture. We use culture. The culture is a really interesting word. It's a little bit like complacency, right? There are some areas that will agree you don't want complacency, but I can just as easily turn it around on other areas and say, well, isn't this complacent? And it's like, oh, well, that's different. I think that culture is a really interesting buzzword. It's really hard to quantify what the hell it exactly means and why, at what point, if all 4 people that got promotions yesterday left and Sark had to bring in 4 new people, if Sark today were sitting here introducing 4 new, boss level people inside the program, I think he would do so feeling like his culture would improve, that they'll learn the culture and I think he would describe it as non-risk worthy, right? That they would bring in new people. You can spin it any way you want to.
The culture is more about the players in college, but that doesn't mean there's not a separate culture within the football offices too. Hey, can I change gears and drop some knowledge on Chad real quick and Catch? From Aggie's Wire, Mike Elko just made one of the more critical hires amid Elko's first month on the job. Former Duke Director of Player Personnel Derek Miller has been hired as the program's new general manager as of December 5th.
Interesting.
There you go. Derek Miller is A&M's GM, Chad. So file that name. I don't know who that dude is.
Interesting. So you're telling me that 4 days ago, Texas and Texas A&M didn't have a GM, and today they both have one.
As of December 5th, it says. So
you didn't even know.
How about that?
2 months.
Aggie's leading the way in the GM discussion.
Well, I shouldn't have even said it because now the Aggies would be like, that's why Sark did it. He's following A&M.
That's what it is. See, I was about to argue the opposite, Jason. I was about to say, wait a minute, they're doing it because Big Brother's doing it. And A&M is saying, no. He's doing it.
And I think the headline out of that is Elko went and hired an Elko guy.
Yep.
He didn't hire the best guy possible. You can't tell me that Duke just happened to have the best GM person candidate in college football sitting on their roster waiting to be plucked. It's a little bit like the Kenny Baker stuff, right? It's like, oh my God, everybody that I talked to was raving about him and this and that. And it's like, well, he didn't have any job offers that I'm aware of. Like, there's a very real chance that had Sark not hired him, he'd be jobless right now from an on-the-field job because the Miami staff was turning over its defensive staff and kind of hard to know whether or not they'd bring back an assistant D-line coach or not, or whether or not a new D-line coach would want to come in and bring in his own assistant. I mean, the NFL is so cutthroat that Eric Bieniemy doesn't have a job right now. And a year ago, there was question marks about whether or not he was the reason for Patrick Mahomes' success or just how much success and credit did he deserve. And then 1 year with Washington, and these things can happen. But the Aggies didn't make the big bold move either. And maybe this is the way now. What I'm predicting, though, is that in very short order, more elevated hires in the GM department are eventually going to come. That if this is a sport of thin margins and you can have someone on the executive level that's tremendous and can really elevate the program while allowing your coach to just focus on more than anything else the areas that he thinks are most important, once upon a time, 5 years ago, I was telling people the GM job was about to happen in college football and that Texas should be on the front foot on this. I'm telling you right now, in the next 5 years, before we get to 2030, the GM position will emerge as an even more important position in college football, and that I believe teams will start to dip into NFL waters or executive levels. Even, at some point, Brandon Harris may not work at Texas anymore. Someone will hire Brandon Harris and say, that guy was the general manager at Texas. So there's a certain amount of clout that he now has that in 10 years will seem like a lot of clout. But in the future, we're going to, I think, see this start to happen more and more. It's where I would go. But look, man, I haven't coached a team into the playoff. Steve Sarkisian is uniquely more skilled than I am and all of us in terms of doing this exact thing. Asking him, though, to make the most educated, forward-thinking hire possible on a role that he probably doesn't quite know exactly how he wants it to work, and Brandon Harris probably doesn't either. They're going to learn this as they go. Is easier said than done. It's asking a lot of Sark to just forever be. This is what Nick Saban always used to do, right? Jason, when he went and got analysts, it's not that he hired 28 analysts. It's that, hey, Charlie Strong is one of 28 analysts, and this is a guy that's a former head coach and a defensive wizard in his own heyday. And, like he would make enough of those types of hires that the IQ level and the football knowledge and the experience just running throughout the building was at a level that nobody in college football could match.
But just I was gonna say, if anybody's just jumping in, we have determined today that Mike Elko and Lane Kiffin invented GMs in college football, and everybody else is just trying to keep up. That's what we've determined today. And we also have a quick super chat: $2. Will Brandon Harris take the points and kick the field goal? All right, Blake. All right. There's no need.
By the way, real quick, Rob says the Baker hate from Orange Bloods is disgraceful. There's no hate. He's talking about Kenny Baker.
Oh, okay. I thought I was about to say Baker Mayfield. Have we been talking
Rob,
about Baker?
for the record, like I'm rooting. Kenny Baker is potentially an amazing success story. If that hire pans out, then it will be his whole life changed. He went from assistant D-line coach at Miami to the D-line coach at Texas. That's an amazing come up. Again, he might not have a job otherwise had this not happened. I'm rooting for the guy. The thing is, it's not hate to acknowledge that when Sarkisian says in the press conference, part of the big role for Kenny Baker is to be a recruiter, and he mentions the state of Georgia, we do have to say out loud and acknowledge that he hasn't done this before. He's never in his entire life ever recruited a national level prospect. And we can't have the discussion about Baker without acknowledging that of the things he's going to be asked to do, he hasn't done a lot of them yet. That's not hate. That's transparent and like big boy discussion. I mean, look, there are probably other shows that you can watch where it's like, this guy's going to be great. I predict he's going to be National Recruiter of the Year. I don't think anybody from Georgia is ever going to sign with Georgia again because they signed Kenny. I mean, we can say these things. Oh, you know what I heard, Chad? Georgia's shaking in their boots. They're worried that they won't ever be able to sign anybody from Georgia again because of Kenny Baker. Why are they afraid of Kenny Baker? Because he knows some people in Georgia. Duh. Like, trust me, look, it's good for the business. It's good for the website for these things to work out. We're discussing the thought process behind it all. And could it have been better? It's the same thing when we talk about in-state recruiting. Did Texas have a badass recruiting class? Yes. Yes, they did. We celebrated the hell out of it. We did live videos for half the damn announcements as they occurred. Great recruiting class. Could it have been better? Yes. Does Steve Sarkisian agree with us? Yes. Per a conversation that he had with the ticket last week, the state of Texas is really, really important. They want to kick ass in the state of Texas. When we talk about the fact that maybe they could kick a little more ass, it doesn't mean that we hate Texas. It also doesn't mean that we hate the recruiting class that Texas built. What we're talking about is, if they'd kicked a little more ass, if they had signed two more super blue chip guys from Texas, they might have had the number 1 recruiting class in the country, the number 2 recruiting class in the country, instead of like the number 5 recruiting class in the country. It's just all we're talking about is a way to elevate and if these ways were even needed. I don't think, Rob, the one thing that Jason, Chad, and I would all agree on, we don't really know. We're asking some rhetorical questions in a lot of senses. Is there a better way of choosing a path for making a hire? Us having the discussion about it does not mean at the end of this show we will have ironed out the correct answer. It's hard to say. I mean, if it were easy, everybody would do it and the path would already be taken. So I just, again, like, hate. Come on. We hate Kenny Baker, or we just are curious about the background, because the Kenny Baker hire is completely different than the Johnny Nansen hire. Can we not talk about like how they're different and why were they different? And so just
You got to give him this credit, Catch. You got to give Sark this credit. He is not developing a pattern in terms of the way he hires in different spots. He's given us all examples. Hey, go out and hire the absolute best dude. Yep, done that. Go out and get some young guy maybe a lot of people haven't heard about, but I just think he's a badass. Yep, done that. Go inside your own office and elevate people from within. Sure, done that. Create a job that didn't even exist to help you do that. He's done that too.
Well,
he's got all versions of it.
He name dropped Mike McDaniel today.
Yeah.
I would have loved for someone in the 45 minutes of question asking to have said, hey, back to Kenny Baker, coach, a bit of an unorthodox hire compared to the way you've hired other guys. You mentioned Mike McDaniel. Can you talk about like what McDaniel told you about Baker? And like ultimately the thing that sold you on Baker the most was what? And that just wasn't anything that was explored today. But, me wondering about those things doesn't mean I hate the guy. It's possible, quite honestly, if Sark had gone in a little more and said, look, I called up Mike McDaniel and I said, Mike, I've had Kenny Baker's name mentioned to me as a guy that I should talk to. What are your thoughts on Kenny Baker? Oh, Sark. He is the best communicator among people in terms of coaching. Like the players love him. He's able to take NFL concepts and relay them back. We talk about it with Greg Olson in the booth in fantasy, in football all the time, right? He's able to take something really complicated and tell an audience in 5 seconds like how they should understand it. It's a hard thing to do. And maybe there's something there. And whatever it would be, he might have said, this is what I heard. And we might have all come away today going, oh, now we understand Kenny Baker a little bit better. Now we know what it is that was the thing that made him the hire. But we didn't get that today. So, it's hard to talk about Kenny Baker. We're using all of the information we have. It's somewhat limited right now.
Yeah. Let me ask both of you guys a question, because we have that obvious thing sometimes where when a strength and conditioning coach is doing well, because you can see it. You see a guy change in one summer workout, and then he starts playing badass on the field, and you go, whoa, maybe Torrey Becton needs to get a little love. Jason, I'll start with you. Give me an indicator that a GM is going to be doing their job. What are you going to look for now that Texas has a GM and you know what's in place? And frankly, now that this person got promoted from within, what kind of thing could you see, experience, find out about where you'd go, well, damn, I guess we got to give Brandon Harris a little love for that?
And that's a really good question, because I don't really know what he's going to be doing. I guess for me, it's not going to be like necessarily wins and losses on the field. It's not going to be obviously offensive schemes or, whatever. Defense gave up 40 points this week. Are there going to be holes in the roster in terms of talent, but more behind the scenes? What are we going to hear from sources in the program about just how smoothly things are running for recruiting events and game day operations and, meetings among the staff, among, what they need on their roster? Just kind of, we always hear little things here and there about, this is going great. Or sometimes we hear things are not going great at whatever, maybe a junior day or some event like that. But I guess, it's kind of hard to think of a tangible thing, but just kind of picking the brains of sources of people inside the program. Hey, what's the general vibe inside the program? How smoothly are things running? How happy is everybody in the program? I'm trying to think of like some tangible way to grade a general manager. Ultimately, it comes down to wins and losses, right? I mean that's how everybody's judged in this profession. But it'll more just kind of be, let's see a year from now, and are people saying, man, Brandon Harris has come in and really shaken things up and come up with some creative ideas? Or is it going to be talk about, hey, Brandon's still kind of finding his way a year into this thing, so still growing on the job. So not necessarily as many tangible things, Chad, as more just kind of what we're hearing from people who really are inside the program and kind of deal with him and the issues in the program on a day-to-day basis.
Catch, how about you? You reach out to sources all the time, and they might tell you, hey, this is going on, and the credit would go to, and maybe it's Sark or maybe it's somebody else. What do you think it'll be where it's like, hey, man, here's what's going on, and I think that's Harris.
I think it's I think the collective NIL mentioned today is a big part. You're talking about player retention, roster management. And I think when people hear roster management, like that's also relationship management, right? If you need, Jaden Blue is a perfect example. There was talk coming out of the season, maybe for the second. Remember, a year ago, somebody in this market literally reported that Jaden Blue was transferring. That happened. And then Jaden Blue was like, I'm not going anywhere. But his name was kind of in the rumor mill a little bit. And part of roster management is making sure you're communicating with the agent, you're communicating with parents, you're communicating with – there's a lot to it. Mm-hmm. There's a lot to the managing and fostering relationships. So I think that's a big part of it. It's who's transferring and not transferring. One of the things that Texas kind of has going for it right now is if we look back over the course of the last 5 years, who's left the program into the portal that Texas has really missed. Maybe Jared Wiley's going to play in the NFL. So you might say Jared Wiley. Now, we know why Jared Wiley left, though. They had Jatavian Sanders, and he left because of the presence of Sanders. But, what if there was no Sanders? And we live in a portal era now where guys are going into the portal for all kinds of reasons. Making sure you keep the guys that you want to keep, I think, is a big part of it. I think, for me, the general manager is the guy that reports to Sark, but everybody else needs to be reporting to the general manager and just taking a big load off of Sarkisian's plate with regards to, how many meetings is Sark sitting in? How many does he need to sit in?
Right.
I mean, does he need to sit in like every organizational meeting? I don't know. Like Sark could say, man, I sit in 8 meetings a week at a minimum. And like, do you need to? Like, is there a better way for us to use your time? So I think there are I think NIL, the collectives, player retention, roster management, and I think the supervision of acquiring talent through the portal and in recruiting is a big part of it. And, I think moving forward, that's how we'll discuss it. But how do we decide whether or not someone is having success or not? I think the portal is going to go a long way through it. How successful are you through the portal at identifying targets? Because that's part of the thing with Sark that it's like, is Sark sitting around watching every film of? I was told that every guy that entered the portal was evaluated by the Texas staff. Everybody.
That's like thousands.
I know, but that's what I was told. But
there's got to be something like, whatever. We'll just.
We'll assume.
You're no doubt right, Jason. But how much of that was Sark doing, right? Sark, to me, I think of Jerry Jones when he first took over the Cowboys, the whole socks and jocks thing. I think Sark's a socks and jocks guy. He's washing stuff. He's in everything. Because I think that's how he's been. He's watched Nick Saban. He's watched Pete Carroll. I think that's how he learned his craft, was watching two of truly the great head coaches of all time. How did they approach it? But Pete Carroll in the NFL has been just not just as successful, but I mean, kind of, right? I mean, won a Super Bowl, played in Super Bowls, like they've had success. He did it differently in the pros, and he's done it differently in coaching. And I would imagine he would tell you that in the pros, things are a little more streamlined. And I bet once things were taken out of his control, maybe even against his will, but once it happened, he realized, I can just focus on this. And if the organization needs my thoughts on something, I can give it to them. But I'm not scouting it's not my job to watch film of every guy in the draft and then to take the lead in the direction in that. That's not how they do it in the pros. The idea that that's how you would do it in college football, I think sounds normal. Of course, the head coach is the one kind of taking charge here, but it's like it's only 24 hours in a day, and you spend 5 of them sleeping if you're maybe 4 if you're Lou Holtz, but you're spreading yourself out. And I think what the general manager job does is it makes your head coach be able to focus on the things that he does absolutely the best. And if the general manager makes the head coach better and is able to do all of these other things at a high level, then you've got a good GM. If Sark weren't a great recruiter, but all he was what's the best thing Sark does? X's and O's, nobody's better than him. And if instead of having to focus on all this stuff he's not great at, and he is as a recruiter, but what if he wasn't? What if then all of a sudden it's like, coach, don't worry about going to high schools. You go work on whatever you need to do for next year to have the X's and O's and the coaching DNA philosophical things taken care of. We'll handle this other stuff. We would say, well, that's fantastic. You took him away from things he's just not great at, and you were able to steer him to the things he does best and made him even better. That's how I think of it.
Gotcha.
Now, before we wrap it up,
yeah,
and it sounds like we were about to. Anything else from today? I know we started off the show, didn't quite jump straight into the GM discussion. Anything else from today that you'd like to give a mention, Jason?
No, kind of ran down my highlights. Just incredibly quiet day for Texas. I mean, Terry Bussey was the only news I was really tracking today. And not just for Texas. I mean, just nationally, not very much recruiting news on National Signing Day. It's just such a, it's been a few years now, but it's still every year. It's kind of hard for me, still hard for me to wrap my head around, right? Catch, you and I are used to the first Wednesday in February being 100 mile an hour from 6 a.m. till 10 p.m. And
today was weird, man.
Today I ran a couple errands at noon. I'm like, what the hell have I earned on that on a National Signing Day?
That's
I was like, I got to go pick up something for my daughter. Yeah, I got that covered. No problem. I'm not missing anything. No, just weirdly kind of uneventful today in terms of recruiting perspective, but A&M had a couple of reasons to celebrate. So good for them.
Just as a heads up, guys, tomorrow, 12:20, Silas Bolden will join us in House Divided. We'll have a conversation with the only transfer in this Texas portal class that's not already on campus.
Good interview. I've talked to him before. He's a good interview. Yeah, you guys will enjoy him.
I'm curious about where he thinks he's best lined up at. This is one of the questions Sark got today was how do you use all 3 receivers? Do you move them around? He played a lot outside. I'm curious what Silas Bolden thinks upon entering Texas, where his best skill set is. He'll join us at 12:20 tomorrow. I got that locked in, confirmed. And Jason's right. He's great, man. Every time I've reached out to him, he's always real. I don't honestly, Chad, have any worries that anything bad will happen there because he's on top of it. If I send him a message right now, he'd get back to me in like 3 minutes. He's on the spot.
I like that. One other quick thing, Catch, just from the OCD department. When Steve Sarkisian tells everybody, because of his experience, when he tells you how to pronounce one of those long Samoan names, but in a short way, pay attention. He said Tia Salvea. Everybody else just stop. Tia Salvea. He made it real simple. Man went to BYU. The man coached at Washington. He's dealt with a lot of those names. And when he finds out one of those kids wants to just be called Tia, he's like, well, stop. That's good. That's what we're going to call you. So Tia Salvea, that one stood out to me.
Woo!
That's good news.
Shorten it to T. You can just go to T. We'll just call you T, dude.
Man, Tia Salvea. I love that. And the only other thing I would have, gentlemen, since Jason just kind of mentioned it, and Catch, you were bringing it up with Bolden, let me ask both of you about Terry Bussey real quick. If you're going to draw up the play, if Terry Bussey is going to be the focus of the first play of the 2024 season, Wigman is going to throw, maybe hand off, whatever, to Bussey. How would you guys show him off to the crowd?
Wide receiver screen, dude. Just get him in a little bit of space and see if he can work his magic. That guy's dynamic. But he's dynamic on either side of the ball, dude. I'd maybe put him at punt return, kick return, defensive back. But if I'm on offense, just get him a play, try to get him a little bit of space, quick, easy pass, wide receiver screen, let him make 5 guys miss and then take off with it. Yeah.
Okay.
I might do that little pick and pop play that I used to call for to help Quinn Ewers get into a rhythm, complete some passes, just have him come in, put motion, catch that shotgun, pitch it forward to him, end around, something like that. Let him do his thing. He's as Jason said, he's dynamic with the ball in his hands. He's electric, but he is he's electric on both sides. Aggie's got a fantastic player, and I would just say I would be very encouraged as an Aggie that he went to the national bowl games and stood out. He didn't.
From a small school, that's always something people question, but held up well, and great kid too, man. I always, as I get older, I like highlighting the good kids, and he's a high character dude. So
remember Brennan Thompson comes to Texas and kind of the same level of classification in high school, and it was all a bit too much for him early on. That wasn't the case for Bussy, and it made me very comfortable with him as a 5-star prospect after seeing that amongst elite of the elite peers, he was more than in his element. He was as good as anybody at those games. The Aggies got a good one.
Gotcha. And another quick one. Speaking of talented Aggies, tonight, guys, on The Outsiders at 9 o'clock, we're talking to Shane Leckler, and I'm told he might be like drinking at a deer lease. What would you guys ask Shane Leckler if you could?
I don't really have a question on who did he punt for?
The Raiders
and Texans.
Okay.
Oh,
yes. Yeah, you know what? He was on my fantasy team. I should remember that for the Texans.
Yeah, ended up with Houston, but the Raiders mainly.
Yeah, he was on. We have punters on my fantasy team. I'd have to think about that one, man. I don't really know what to ask an Aggie punter, Chad.
I have a question, Chad.
Not an Aggie punter, the
Aggie punter.
I have a question for you, Chad.
What do you got, Catch?
Football groupies, how good are they?
Okay.
Because, we hear about golf groupies, like soccer, baseball. There's the one thing you never hear about is what is the crowd like in the hotel? What do football players, look, he may be married and he can just speak about what he saw, but I'm curious, in that world, what does he have to avoid? What's waiting for him around every corner when he's in the NFL that he learned very quickly? Okay, when I come into the hotels, be on the lookout for X. What's X?
Gotcha. Okay, fair enough.
All right, real quick before you go. By fantasy league, I tell you, we have punters, and it was the championship game. It was my cousin, his first year in the league, and I forget who was playing. The other guy had Shane Leckler, and it was like the last game of the season. I don't think it was Sunday night. I don't think it was a Monday night game. I remember. And Leckler had one punt with a minute left. And if it went 50 yards, my cousin lost. And he's on the phone with me. And because, our point system is so ridiculous. It's crazy. But Leckler hits it and it goes 54 yards. He's dropping, costing $1,000 on a punt. You talk about a bad beat, dude. You lost on a punt with a minute left in the last game of the year.
The yardage of a punt, like a breath of wind.
Yeah. I just remember bits and pieces of it. But so you can tell Leckler he cost my cousin $1,000 with that punt. So.
Wow. Oh, I'm going to mention that. All right, $1,000 on a punt.
How many times does fantasy get brought up with punters?
Yeah, we don't draft special teams. We draft individual punters, dude. It's intense. So.
That's incredible. All right, I will mention it. I like it. I'm glad I asked now. That's all I got. Sorry for the Aggie content at the end of the recruiting hour. My bad.
You turned this into it was the Orange Bloods recruiting hour and the Tex Ags plus 10. Guys, do us a solid. Hit that thumbs up button, even though Chad made it Aggie-ish towards the end. God, they probably didn't enjoy us glowing over Terry Bussey. He sucks. He doesn't. He's really good. Subscribe to the channel. Get notifications. Rob, that you too. So that whenever we have videos coming out, when they come out. I'll try to be nothing but positive tomorrow because I know that you guys hate when questions get asked. For myself, for Chad, for Jason, who wasn't even supposed to do an hour today, and he did it anyway because – by God, it's National Signing Day 2. one of the biggest days. Okay, never mind. We'll see you tomorrow. Silas Bolden joining us at 12:20. Be there or not. We want you to be there, though. Be there. We'll talk to you soon.